The real question for all of us is not, can I avoid having all these hard things happen to me so I can be happy and my life will be okay and my brain will be all right and all that? Or can I go back in time and get a different set of parents or a different set of genetics or a different set of things that have happened? All of that stuff doesn't have to happen. All that has to happen is you learn how to operate your brain in a different way according to the science of how it was designed by your creator, I believe. And if you can learn how to operate it differently, it will behave differently. And you can behave differently. You can become differently. You feel differently.
Welcome to the Up Your Average podcast, where Keith and Doug give no-nonsense advice to level up your life. So buckle up and listen closely to Up Your Average.
Welcome to another Up Your Average. And I'm thankful that you're here today, and I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Lee Warren, a practicing neurosurgeon, Iraq war veteran, award-winning author, and host of the Dr. Lee Warren podcast. I was having a conversation with my friend Kim Warren a few weeks ago, and she was boasting about our podcast and said, "You know who you need to have? You need to have Dr. Lee Warren on the podcast." And I said, "Great, Kim, shoot me his contact information." And she laughed and said, "Well, I don't know him." And so from that point on, I set out to get this lined up. And why I'm excited about Dr. Warren today is, as you've heard us say before, Gimbal Financial is about thinking differently, buying wisdom, liking what you do, living adventurously, and that generosity wins. And Dr. Warren is spot on that first topic, think differently. He spent his career inside the operating room saving lives, and outside of it, he's been helping people change their lives by connecting neuroscience and faith. His books, Hope is the First Dose and the Life-Changing Art of Brain Surgery, has taught many people what he calls self-brain surgery, practical ways to rewire your brain and to find hope after trauma and become the person you were meant to be. Dr. Warren, welcome. I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Keith. It's a pleasure to be with you, friend. Call me Lee.
Thanks, Lee. So what I thought I would do is just talk, instead of trying to delve into the depths of what you've written about, is just throw a hypothetical person out there and maybe show how the ideas that you've written about might bring hope and encouragement, not only to them, but to their family. And so I was imagining someone that was 18, they were faced with maybe a family stressor. And when that event was so bombastic that their doctors put them on antidepressants, and years later, they realized that maybe their main struggle wasn't necessarily that event, but their ability of coping with that, rather than maybe necessarily some type of chemical imbalance. And I was wondering, how, from your perspective, how would you help somebody separate maybe what might seem truly biological from maybe a event-driven thing?
Yeah, so it's interesting, and that's such a common problem now, Keith. So sadly, we're all kind of being taught by society, teachers, some therapists, some mental health professionals, certainly media. We're taught this idea that our brains sort of are who we are. Like the way your brain works is your identity. Like if you're anxious, if you're depressed, if you have ADHD or whatever, that's just who you are, and you got to deal with it. And that's why you see people doing things like putting their diagnoses in their bio on Instagram, like people identifying themselves to the world as, you need to know this about me so you know how to treat me, you know how to interact with me so you don't trigger me and hurt me, and I need to be safe and all that stuff. And that we're taught that. And then the problem is, when you actually look at the brain science, and if you look at what scripture's always said, but in 21st century neuroscience terms, it isn't true. Like it's really not true that your brain generates who you are, and then if you go through certain things, it changes your brain, that makes you behave the way that you do. What's really true is that the way we think changes our brain structurally over time, and our brain becomes something different chemically and functionally and anatomically and behaviorally than it was before. And if you're unaware of that, if you don't know that you actually have the power to make your brain work differently by changing how you think and the things you say to yourself and that sort of thing. If you don't know that, then the sort of baseline activity of the brain is that when you experience something and you begin to think about it and it promotes feelings and emotions in you, you begin to ponder the feelings and emotions as if they're true, then you start to tell yourself a story about it, and your brain begins to wire to present you a reality and a world around you that thing is true, that thing has turned you into this person or that creates this person's identity. And so then what we know clearly now from neuroscience is if you go through something hard, some kind of trauma or some kind of event or some kind of problem with another person, that thing in and of itself is not what changes your brain. It's not the thing. And we know that because two identical people, two identical twins, can go through the same exact set of circumstances, and one person can be really jacked up by it and broken and messed up and never get over it. Another person can almost have no effect on them at all, or even it can sometimes turn them into a better person than they were. So two people can have the same circumstances and vastly different outcomes. And the science behind it is what we know very clearly. It's not controversial now. Is that it's the responses that we choose after things happen to us that turn our brains into what they are and what they do, and that stuff can change from literally moment to moment in response to what we think about. So if you're experiencing something hard, rather than it becoming who you are, you can learn a different way of responding to that thing, and it'll change the chemical and anatomical environment of your brain, and your life can become different than it is. So the real question for all of us is not, can I avoid having all these hard things happen to me so I can be happy and my life will be okay and my brain will be all right and all that? Or can I go back in time and get a different set of parents or a different set of genetics or a different set of things that have happened? All of that stuff doesn't have to happen. All it has to happen is you learn how to operate your brain in a different way according to the science of how it was designed by your creator, I believe. And if you can learn how to operate it differently, it will behave differently, and you can behave differently. You can become differently. You feel differently. And so it's not that your feelings and your emotions and your thoughts make you behave a certain way. It's that your brain can generate different feelings and thoughts and behaviors if you choose to think about them in a different way.
I've spent a good amount of time reading a lot of Paul's writing, and if I were to summarize a lot of what I see is he says a lot of what you just said. He says, set your mind on this or think about these things. And so from a high level, that's what I hear you saying is you can choose what you think about.
That's right. That's right. In fact, if you want to talk about scripture that refers to these ideas, there's some big ones, and it's all throughout the Bible, really. But there's some big ones in the New Testament. Paul was really an early cognitive neuroscientist 2,000 years ago, because brain imaging now is proving a lot of the things that the Bible prescribes for us. But Romans chapter 12 is the big one, verses 1, 2, and 3. Romans 12:2 says, don't be conformed to the pattern of this world. And what the pattern of this world is that our circumstances, our thoughts, our feelings, our things that we go through make us be a certain way, that we react to them in a certain way. That's the pattern of the world. And we hear people say things like that, live your truth, follow your heart, honor your feelings, all that stuff. But the scripture says, don't be conformed to that pattern, rather be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And now we know, and we know now clearly from brain imaging studies that when you think one thought instead of another thought, your brain immediately begins to make structural changes. And if you think a better thought, you make better brain chemicals. And so people that talk about brain imbalances and chemical imbalances and things like that, it actually doesn't turn out to be really true in the way that we think about it. And the best example of that on the pharmaceutical side is that people that take selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors for depression, the idea was that we need more serotonin in our brain and that'll make us feel better. But it turns out that depressed people don't actually have less serotonin in their brains than anybody else does. They just process it differently, handle it differently. And so raising the level of it makes you feel better, but not really fixes your depression. And so people on SSRIs don't always get better. Some of them do, but not all of them. And if it was just a simple matter of making more serotonin, that would solve all of it for everyone, all of them. And so what Paul says, Romans 12, to transform your mind, your brain will behave differently. And in Philippians 4, as you referenced a second ago, Philippians 4, 6 or 8 says, hey, don't be anxious about anything, but in everything with prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let God guard your heart and mind. You'll be less anxious. And he goes into this long list of things. Think about things that are good and noble and lovely and trustworthy and beautiful and all that stuff. And now we can put you in a scanner and we can say, hey, if you're feeling anxious, just interrupt yourself for a second and make yourself think of something that you're grateful for. And we can see in your brain in real time that the fear center, the anxiety center of your brain will calm down, and the frontal lobes, parts that are related to peace and calm and better decision making, will come online very quickly. Within seconds, you can abort an anxiety attack by forcing yourself to think about different things. And so that should prove to each of us that you have this incredible power to operate your brain the way the Bible says to operate it. And neuroscience will back you up, and you'll actually feel better when you do that without taking a medicine. That doesn't mean that some people don't need medications. I'm not saying that.
No.
I'm saying that the vast majority of people can learn to operate their brains in a different way that will produce measurable changes in their lives very quickly. You can prove it neurologically. It's been published by thousands of neuroscience researchers that things like cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, is a talking based type of psychotherapy. And it's been shown with obsessive compulsive disorder, which is really a brain disorder that produces terrible abnormal behaviors and devastating problems for people. And cognitive behavioral therapy has been shown to be as or more effective than pharmaceutical management for lots of people with obsessive compulsive disorder. It's been shown the same in anxiety and depression and other types of schizoaffective disorders and ADHD and all kinds of things, that cognitive therapy can actually change their behavior and their feelings as much as medication can. And so that means that none of us should think that the answer is always in a prescription or in somebody giving me something or doing something outside of me to make it better, because you have this inherent power to kind of operate your brain like you're your own brain surgeon.
So with our hypothetical person, Lee, that she's 18 and she's feeling all these things, and she goes to the doctor and the doctor just moves her this direction. What if somebody had intervened? What principles might have helped her turn that? Because I assume the emotions wouldn't shut down immediately. That takes time for the emotions to kind of follow reality.
Well, so the number one thing is, I think if we're parents listening out there and we're saying, how do we arm our kids with this? Because the cultural message is really, now understand too, the pharmaceutical industry has a vested interest in this plan, right? Get everybody on a prescription because they make more money. And again, there are some people that really need it, but many people can get better if they learn to sort of reprocess what they're thinking and how they're feeling. Now, the answer is to your question is, if they'd intervened earlier, done something different, not written the prescription, what could they have done earlier? And what you can do earlier is teach your kids as they're growing up that really good research shows that something like 2/3 of the automatic things that we think about and feel aren't true. So lots of the things that pop into your head, everybody has these thoughts. I'm a loser. I'll never be able to solve this problem. Nobody's ever going to love me, or whatever it is. That these thoughts that pop into our head, an alarming number of them are negatively biased or distorted or just frankly untrue. And so that means that if we can teach kids not follow your feelings, honor your heart, live your truth, not that, don't teach them that. Teach them that when you feel something and when you think something automatically, you need to be curious about whether or not that's actually true before you react to it. And if you can just build in this little pause, this little gap between the stimulus, something triggers you, somebody says something mean to you, you have an emotion that feels really strong, you feel sad or whatever, between that and what you do about it. Like, do you run off with a string of worst case scenario thinking? Do you take a medication? Do you open a bottle of alcohol? Do you watch pornography? Do you react in some way to this thing as if it's true? Then instead of that, build in a little space and challenge, be curious or cynical about the thought or feeling and ask questions of it. Is that really true? Like, if nobody ever loves me, well, my dad loves me. Well, my friends like me. You know, I do have people who do love me. So question the thought and the feeling instead of just reacting and believing it. Then a couple of things happen with emotion. So feelings pop up, and I like to tell people, feelings aren't facts; they're chemical events in my brain. Like a good example is, so when you feel something strong, it provokes a physiological response in your body, right? So if you open the mailbox and get a letter and it says IRS on it, right? Most of us go, there's some kind of reaction to that, and the reaction will be oftentimes the hair standing up on the back of your neck and your heart racing, your mouth getting dry, and all that. Now, the question is, like, why is your body doing that to you? What does it mean? And it might be that you are afraid that you're going to get audited or get a fine or get in trouble because you cut corners or didn't file a tax return or something. It might be that you're afraid. And when you're afraid, what happens? Your heart races and your blood pressure goes up and your hair stands up on the back of your neck and all that. Or it might be that you've been anticipating your refund and the money's really important to you. You need it to make your house payment or whatever. And so you're excited. Well, what happens when you're excited? Your heart races and your blood pressure goes up and the hair stands up on the back of your neck. And just be aware that in two different scenarios, one that you would say is scary and one that you would say is exciting, your body is sending you the exact same signals physiologically. So what makes one of them scared and one of them excited is the story that you're telling yourself about what you're feeling, not the feeling itself. And so what happens to many of us is we feel something and we identify that as a certain negative emotion. And then from now on, that's the story that we tell ourselves about what that feeling means. But if you look at that envelope more closely, you might see that it was addressed to your neighbor. It wasn't even yours. And so it was never true. Neither one was true. Or maybe it's just a notice that they're running behind on, processing returns. It's going to be 6 weeks or whatever. It's something different than you thought. So it just teaches the lesson that not everything you feel turns out to be based in reality. And we know from neuroscience now that your brain doesn't have any ability to discern between something that's actually happening in real time and something that you're just remembering or imagining. So that's the reason that at night, if you hear a sound in your house and your brain says, "Oh, there's an axe murderer in the house. He's going to kill me," you get really scared, right? And maybe there is one. And if there is, then it's appropriate for you to be scared and you want to run away. But it also could have been, a branch against the window or a deer bumping into your window outside or something. It happens to us all the time here in Nebraska. An animal runs into the window at night, scares us to death. But there's not an axe murderer in the house. But our body tells us that something's wrong, that there's something scary happening, even when there's not, because your brain can't tell the difference. And so if you teach your kids that, and you teach yourself that, and you teach your spouse that, you teach people around you that, hey, not everything you feel and think turns out to be true. And so if you spend your life reacting to things as if they're true, and they turn out not to be true, then you get frustrated, and then you feel like you're making mistakes, and you start beating yourself up, and you start having to apologize for stuff all the time, and then you end up in this negative cycle all the time. It really didn't have to happen if you just put that little space in there between the stimulus and the response.
I'm the old guy in the office, and I tell the youngsters all the time that you guys speak differently than I do. And
Yeah.
one of the language things that's common for them that's different than my language is they frequently say, "I feel like," boom, 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 whatever. They just say, "I feel like," and I'll tell them repeatedly, it's like, well, when I grew up, we would say, "I think this," instead of "I feel like." And
Yeah.
it seems like it's a subtlety, but I think the more that you are trained that your feelings are the most important thing, it can sure send you in a lot of different directions.
It sure can. And in fact, there's again, I keep quoting research, but there's really good research from quantum physics and from neuroscience that says that the more you pay attention to something, the more, they call it attention density, the more you focus on something, say something you feel like anxiety, you start to feel anxious, or you start to imagine you're going to go to this place and that place usually makes you anxious. So you start thinking about getting there. Your body will, again, can't tell the difference between real and imagined. Your body will start to share with you the physiological signals associated with that anxiety that you're anticipating, and you'll start feeling like you're getting anxious. And the more you pay attention to that and the more density you put on that feeling, your body will amplify the signal because your brain thinks it's real now because you've told your brain that you're having it. You say, "I feel an anxiety attack coming on." So your brain says, "Oh boy, I better get ready to put you in fight or flight because I want to keep you safe." And so then your amygdala fires up and then your physiological stuff happens and cortisol gets released and your body goes into a real emotional state that feels like a panic attack because you made one happen by anticipating that you might have one. And so that's a real phenomenon now. And it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It's just that you've misplaced your attention and you misdirected your neural inputs to your brain. If you understand, I can feel something and it doesn't mean that it's real. And therefore I'm not obligated to react to it as if it is real. And I had to deal with this. I'm not just prescribing stuff. I dealt with this after the war. I was deployed to the Iraq War as a combat neurosurgeon, and I survived over 100 mortar and rocket attacks. So it was some real danger, some stuff blowing up and people killed and stuff. And I had to do 200 brain surgeries in a tent hospital and all kinds of scary things happening. And for years after that, like I would hear a sound, a car muffler or something, somebody shutting a freezer door, and it felt the same kind of sound, that's a vacuum sort of sound that sounds like a mortar getting launched. And I would feel like I was in danger, like physically feel in danger. My heart would race and all that stuff would happen. It was PTSD. I know now, but I had to learn how to tell my brain that I wasn't actually in danger and that there was actually nothing objectively wrong. I was just feeling something because a sound made me remember something from a time in my life when I was in danger, but I'm not now. And so I could build myself a case for, hey, go ahead and abort that panic feeling because there's not actually anything unsafe happening here. And your brain will do it. Your brain is always listening to your mind.
I was in a bad car wreck about a decade ago, just south of Indianapolis. And whenever I would go back through that intersection, I would do what you're describing. I could feel my body, and they converted that road from a state highway to an interstate, and so the government did away with it. I couldn't even tell where that place was anymore. So my brain couldn't even recognize where that place was. So I don't have those feelings anymore. So it
Wow.
was kind of an interesting observation, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
One of the things and again, I don't have the knowledge that you do. One of the things that I've had the strong opinion is that we can't change the memories that we have in our brain. But my observation is the emotions that are attached to those memories seem to mute over time. Like if you lose somebody and they die, the emotions initially are a lot higher than, say, a decade from now. And that seems to be kind of what I heard you saying, even about your time in Iraq, that the emotions weren't necessarily as strong today as 20 years ago or whatever.
Well, that can be true, and it's true especially in people who do the work to understand what they went through and process it, talk about it, unpack it, don't leave it stored in your body, all that stuff. But there are people who get stuck in it, and you know people like this who say their wife dies unexpectedly 20 years ago, and you meet them on the street today, and you say, "Hey Joe, how's it going?" And he goes, "Ever since my wife died, I just haven't been able to kind of they're stuck. They just get stuck in grief or in trauma response or whatever." And we know from the brain now, there's a part of your brain called the anterior cingulate cortex. And it's the part of your brain that's involved in switching from one emotional state to another one, like from being sad to being happy or whatever. And people with complex, profound grief that they don't, and same thing with PTSD, they get stuck there and their anterior cingulate just basically shuts off, like just goes quiet on the scans. And to fix it, what we've learned is you have to engage something else that part of the brain does. And that part of the brain is also involved in willpower and resilience and grit and things like that. And so they've learned that if you can make yourself do something hard that feels hard to you that you don't want to do, like when you're sad after trauma, you don't feel like getting out of bed. And you make yourself get out of bed anyway. Like you don't feel like making your bed. You make yourself make your bed anyway. You don't feel like going to the gym. You do it anyway. If you can make yourself do something you don't want to do, your brain, the cingulate, gets this message. Okay, I guess even though I don't want to switch, I'm going to switch because you told me to, and it'll switch and activate a little bit. And then there's this thing called Hebb's law, where Hebb's law says that the neurons that fire repeatedly in the same way, they wire and make themselves more robust. So neurons that fire together wire together. So what happens is that when the cingulate activates in response to you having the willpower to do that hard thing, then next time you need to do a hard thing, there's more wiring in there and it's easier to do the hard thing. It gets easier. And so the more you persist, then it starts to build more robust connections. And before long, the anterior cingulate comes back online and those people start processing their emotions better. And so it turns out that doing uncomfortable things is one of the paths to getting through trauma and grief. And so it lines up really well with Romans chapter 5, 3-5.
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
Right. Yeah, it says suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. You have this part of the brain that's about suffering, and it also is about willpower and endurance. And if you can switch from something that you process when you're suffering to something that you have to endure a little bit, then all of a sudden you start to get confident that, okay, I'm going to be able to get out of bed today. I'm going to be able to do this thing. I'm going to get in my car again and make that drive again. And you start to develop this sort of character to being the kind of person that can do hard stuff and navigate hard emotions and all that. And you start getting confident, and then that produces hope. So there's this social scientist that came up with this definition of hope that says that hope is the ability to believe that you can get there from here. And they define it as having what they call agency. And agency is the belief that there's something that you can do about the situation that you're in. But there's just a belief that, okay, I can figure this out, I can solve it. There's a path, there's a process that can make it better. And then there's opportunity to do that thing. And so that means that what the Bible says is to get to hope, you have to suffer a little bit. Like to become the kind of person who can be hopeful in the face of hard things, you have to have previously gone through hard things. And that's actually for parents. If there's young people or parents out there, really important to say, we look at our society right now and we're seeing a generation of young people that are struggling to launch. They're not getting their driver's licenses when they're 16 as often as they used to. They're not able to go on job interviews without taking a parent frequently now. They're not dating like they used to. And they're not going to college as early as they used to. They're having a hard time because it's scary. And what we've done is we've protected them from suffering when they were little. We got this group of parents who were raised with the theory that, hey, if your kid doesn't like the person they're sitting by in class, you ask the teacher to move them to a different seat. If they don't get on the sports team with their best friend, ask them to be put on a different team so they'll be more comfortable. Like to avoid suffering when they're little. And what we've learned is the brain, in order to be an adult who can operate in a hard world, you have to have gone through some hard things when you were young and learned that you could survive them. Because that engine of navigating hardship and turning it into hope depends on having run a bunch of reps and done that play enough times, at times in your life when it was safe. Like nobody dies from having to sit next to a kid that they don't like in first grade, right? But people do die if they're not good drivers because they're too scared to drive, and when they finally have to, they get in a car wreck and they die. And that backs up to what you did with them when they were 5. You didn't let them play on the monkey bars because you were afraid they would break their arm. You didn't let them hang out with kids that weren't always nice to them. You didn't let them play on a sports team when their best friend wasn't there and all that stuff. So they never learned that they actually are resilient enough to get through hard stuff, and they live scared all the time, and they don't know how to move out of into their life. So it just turns out neurologically, again, lines up with scripture just right.
So one of the things I hear you saying is that the seemingly noble action of like a helicopter parent. They want the best for their child, but that could actually be doing more damage than good, helicoptering over the top of them.
It is doing more damage, and the science is catching up now. That all of the research is saying, hey, these kids that are having trouble launching, it's because we protected them from minor hardships, and now they don't know that they can actually face real hardship, because the world's got a bunch of hard stuff in it, right? I mean, you're going to have hard things happen to you, and you need to build a brain that will support you in knowing that you're the kind of person who can get through those things. And it's all through the Bible. If you look at Lamentations, for example, there's this, in Lamentations chapter 3, there's a story where the city's under siege and they've killed the king and they pillaged all the women and they murdered all the babies and all these terrible things are happening. And then you get to chapter 3 and this guy, whoever wrote Lamentations, the book is not named as to who the author is, but some people think it's the prophet Jeremiah, but whoever it is, and he says, basically, he's looking at all this suffering that's happening around him, and he says, I am the man who's tasted sorrow. Like he's the guy that's had all these bad things happen, even though all these other people have been killed and murdered and cannibalizing their kids and stuff. He's saying, whoa, man, my life is terrible. And he's starting to recount all of his suffering, right? He's getting really depressed and hopeless. And he says, I'll never feel hope again. I'll never feel okay again. And then he does this remarkable thing where he gets into that metacognitive state and he snaps himself out of it. And he says, you know what though? I'm going to recall this to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. He preaches to himself stuff that's true. And what he does is he remembers that there's been hard stuff before that God got him through. And he just decides, even though the thing is still going on, he's going to hope that God will do it again. And that gives him the juice to start moving again. And the book goes on for 2 more chapters and it's still terrible. So the lesson is, he didn't wait to see how it was going to turn out before he decided if he was okay or not. He got himself okay by saying the right things to his brain, and then he proceeded through the hard stuff confidently because he knew God was going to be there with him in it.
That's really cool. One of the practical things I do is I daily look back on the things that got done productively and or where I've seen maybe the hand of God in that thing. And I think I've also found that like if I've got truth that I can anchor myself in when that difficulty comes, I can either get anxious about the circumstance or lean into that truth. And
Yeah.
I think when you're describing that writer, I thought of King David when his son died
Yeah.
and he got himself up, flipped the switch and said, I can't, he's not coming back here, but I'll see him one day. And so he went to that truth to give him hope to move forward.
Yeah. That's right.
And I think about what you're saying. I just have seen this in the last 2 or 3 years. Um, in the love chapter of the Bible, there's a list, the laundry list of things, but I'd always looked over that section. It's one verse. It says, "When I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, and I reasoned like a child." And I think what I hear you saying eh, is children just say whatever's on their mind. They think everything is true. And I don't think they know how to reason that. Maybe as a parent, I need to help them take a thought and just kind of inspect it and see whether it's true or not. Like I can help teach my children to reason.
That's right. That's
That's
part of
kind of what I hear you saying.
our responsibility as parents. I mean, your kids, until they're about 22 years old, their frontal lobes aren't fully developed. And so the part of the brain that's responsible for reasoning and cognition and decision making isn't fully developed until you're 25 to 27 years old. And so if you're asking a 6-year-old to make decisions based on how they feel, well, they're not wired for that. Like they're not neurologically equipped to make the best decision in that. So that's where you get, again, challenge this idea that, you live your truth and we'll kind of honor you, what you feel and all that kind of stuff. That leads to some devastating consequences from surgical things that get done to kids because they feel certain things to all kinds of societal and psychological problems that people are having as adults now that happens because we let them do things that they're not neurologically equipped to do at a time in their life when they really need guidance and structure. And so just if we listened to the science and the scripture instead of societal things, so sociology and pressure from culture, then we'd have better outcomes with our kids. If your real mission is, do I want my kid to feel like that they're happy right now, or do I want them to be equipped to be happy for their whole life and make good decisions that keeps them safe and helps them be productive and missional and have purpose in their lives and all those things. It's a binary choice. Like you can't give your kid everything they want when they're 6 if you want them to know what the right things to want are when they're 16 and 20.
Boy, that's huge. So I'm thinking back. I know I've taken a lot of your time, but I'm thinking back to my 18-year-old that now they've been taking their antidepressants for a while, but and they've kind of been numb through a lot of this. This has kind of numbed their personality a lot. But now they're in their late 20s, approaching 30, and they realize that trauma that they had all those years ago really was just an event-driven thing. But now they're 30 years old and they really haven't had to process coping mechanisms. So what encouragement would you give to that 30-year-old as they're on the on-ramp to rethinking everything they've done as an adult?
Yeah. So when you evaluate, that's a really good place to be, like evaluating the results that you're getting out of your life. And if you do that, if you start questioning, the first thing is don't just go looking for what to blame your situation on. Like don't go back in time. And we're seeing this a lot with kids who are going to therapy and they're getting told that all your problems are because your dad was too hard on you when you were 12 and you should cut them off and set boundaries and all that stuff. Like that's not a path to healing. You don't get happier when you do that. There's good research around that too. The path is understand what's the first time I felt this? Like, what was going on in my life the first time I felt this? Not whose fault was it, but what was happening? And what stories did I tell myself around it? What were the decisions that I made and the coping skills or responses that I developed around that? And then when I look at my life now, are those things serving me well? I mean, first, don't beat yourself up too much because obviously you survived it, right? You got from 18 to 30 and you made it. You survived. You're alive. You're dead. You're not suicidal or whatever. You made it. So some of the things that you did, got you through that. So don't beat yourself up about it. But if it's not serving you well now, like you're raising a young family and you're saying, do I want my kids to feel a lot of the stuff that I felt for the last 12 years or 15 years or whatever? Do I want them to feel differently than that? Do I want them to get to their 30s and say, gosh, I wish I hadn't taken all this medicine. I feel kind of numb and it hasn't been the best thing for me or whatever. And then if you say, okay, I don't like the responses that I have, I don't like the outcome I'm getting from the way I'm thinking about all this, then you need to understand two things. One is that all of the trauma research and the brightest people writing in the trauma space, like Bessel van der Kolk, the guy that wrote Body Keeps the Score, and Gabor Mate, and all these famous trauma researchers, all of them agree now that trauma is not actually the thing that happened to you. It's the thoughts you have around that and the responses that you've made in response to it. And that's, again, the best example of that is that if it was true that your life is irreparably altered by trauma, and I'm not saying if you get your arm cut off, that is the thing that happened and your arm's cut off, that's true. But it's in terms of your emotional and mental health, the event itself, if it had the inherent power to define the rest of your life, there would be no need for a counseling and therapy industry because you couldn't change any of it if it was the
Makes
event.
sense, yeah.
But it's not the event. It's the way you think about the event, the way you process the event, and the choices that you make going forward from the event. And so that means that if those things are no longer serving you well, right, they're not helping you. You're choosing alcohol, you're choosing pornography, you're spending too much money and you're numbing yourself with shopping or whatever, or you're arguing with your family and you see this thing playing out in your family the way it played out in your parents' family and you don't like it, then you get to do the work to choose a new response, and your brain will reward you by giving you a different reality. And so that means that if how things are going for you aren't serving you well, then you need to do the work. You have a responsibility now to do the work to change those responses so that they will serve you well. Because you want your life to feel right. And all of us have bought this idea that if there's something wrong with my brain and I can't feel right, then the only alternative is medicine or despair or whatever. And that's not the truth. Your brain will become a different brain in real time when you start thinking differently about your life.
I love that. So if somebody was that 30-year-old, then there are resources for them. Your books are out there, your podcasts, there are things and there are sources of encouragement. And my hope and say my prayer would be that there would be more people espousing these ideas that you really need to think better about what you're thinking about is what the essence of it is. And what other hope would you tell this person today?
Yeah, so I would say I'm a brain surgeon, right? So as a brain surgeon, I am a specialist in the nervous system, but I don't know very much about the heart anymore. It's been a long time since I was in medical school. So if I'm going to operate on somebody's brain and they start having chest pain, if I want to be a good doctor to them, I'm not going to try to manage their chest pain. I'm going to call a cardiologist, an expert who has the training and expertise to come and help me manage my patient. I'm not abdicating my responsibility. I'm not weak and stupid because of it. I'm actually smart and wise because I'm going to get that patient the help they need, right? So if we're talking about how do we take care of ourselves, there's going to come some times in your life when you might not have the tools, the training, the insight, the wisdom to actually manage this thing yourself. You might need a professional, mental health professional, counselor, pastor, chaplain, therapist, somebody to come alongside you and say, "Hey, help me evaluate the way I'm thinking isn't helping me. Like partner with me to help me understand and give me some tools." So professional help is not bad, but if you're going to choose that, especially if you're a Christian, make sure that your therapist has the same worldview that you do. That your therapist says, you know what, I do believe in the sovereignty and the sanctity of Scripture. I do believe that the Word has more power than what we think we know about science does. And I do believe that your mind and your brain are not the same thing, and you can make your brain better by changing your mind. Like I do believe it's not all just about prescriptions and blaming your parents and all that. So find you a therapist and interview them and make sure you have a similar worldview. And don't just abdicate your responsibility to yourself and do whatever they tell you. Like be invested in it, be part of the process. But there is more mental health resources available today than there ever have been in history. There's more opportunity, there's less stigma, there's just better stuff and more available stuff than ever before. And yet the problem is getting worse instead of better. The number of people that identify themselves as being anxious or depressed or suicidal or alcoholic is going up. And that tells us that it's not inherently the right move to get professional help or take medicine or any of that. That's not the sole fix for this. The fix for it is you getting invested in your own care, attaching what God has promised you will help you, and doing the work yourself, even though you may occasionally need an outsider to help you focus and get that right.
Boy, that is a great word. I know I can attest to the idea that I started incorporating these principles in my own life probably 30 years ago, and having gone through a couple seasons of depression or whatever, that I clearly was thinking wrong through those periods, and then hitting the reset and working my way through those have given me hope beyond measure. And so I'd like to just thank our listeners for their time and tell them there's encouragement out there, and feel free to reach out to Dr. Warren's resources, or to give the folks at Gimbal Financial a heads up, and we can sure help you in that direction as well. But I sure appreciate your time. You've been very generous with me today.
Thank you, Keith. It's an honor to meet you, friend. Thank you.